And welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Banner Monday, where we begin each week the best way that we know how, and that is by talking Indiana and Big Ten basketball. A couple of quick housekeeping notes here right off the top. Remember, our next show is going to be Thursday night, IU versus Purdue. It's going to be the post-game show. That game is a 7 o'clock Eastern tip on FS1. So since it's Thursday night, the post-game show and Assembly Call Radio will all be one this week. If you need tickets, remember to use the URL iutickets.shop to go directly to the IU listing on SeatGeek, and then you can use that promo code ASSEMBLY to get $10 off your first purchase. And, of course, if you want any Indiana gear and you want the most comfortable and unique IU gear anywhere, go to homefieldapparel.com and use the promo code ASSEMBLY20 to get 20% off of all of your gear there at homefieldapparel.com. All right, and now I am pleased to welcome in from the Big Ten Network, the Sporting News, and Fox. He's one of the hardest working men in college basketball, the venerable Mike DeCourcy. And Mike, the Hoosiers won 2 games this week. Everyone's excited again. So nothing funny here off the top. Let's jump right into the basketball talk. What did you learn about Indiana this week?
Well, I think we were reminded what they're capable of doing when they do the things that are correct. And that starts with throwing the ball to the guy with the most talent, and that would be Trace Jackson Davis. You put him in positions to score in and around the lane, and the defense is in trouble. And we saw that lots of occasions, and the Arkansas game would be an example of that. The first half got access to the ball a lot. Second half, almost none. You saw what happened in the results. The Minnesota game, got the ball a lot in the first half, got the ball a lot, maybe even more in the second half. I don't know how it statistically broke down, but he made some huge buckets in the second half. And the Penn State game, that unbelievable post-up that he had where he was matched against Lamar Stevens, and he did the spin move on Lamar. Lamar's a high-level college defender. That is not easy to do. And he left him behind and then dunked it. With a defensive help coming across, had no chance. He showed you what he's capable of doing. We saw that they can close a game, although, again, they made some mistakes at the end of Penn State. I was not one who thought that Al Durham's decision to pass the basketball, I think it was to Race Thompson on the 2-on-1.
Yep.
I did not think that was a bad decision. I know some people just pull it out. I don't have a problem with that either. If you decide to pull it out, but if you want to go ahead and put the 2 points on the board, you do it, but you don't make a difficult pass there. Yeah. It has to be an easy pass. It has to be something akin to me handing the ball to you. I mean, not literally, but something that guaranteed to be completed. And that was a mistake. And Al's got to be better at end of games. You remember the shot he took against Maryland near the 4-minute mark, and now this. He's too important at the end of games because he's going to have the basketball. He's going to be in most of the time at the end. So he's got to do better than that. But even with that episode, you still saw a team really confident down the stretch, making the smart plays, getting stops. And my goodness, I don't think you can say enough about Justin Smith. In the Big Ten and beyond, which we did Sunday, we don't usually have what we call breakdown tapes where we feature a particular component of the game or a particular player, an aspect. And so we had a little bit of a breakdown on Justin within the highlight. And I tried to accentuate how important he was in those final 3 minutes or so. He was fantastic. I mean, the help where he stole the basketball, the offensive rebound he chased down. I think he had a tough finish in there as well on offense. It was spectacular. And if it had been a Saturday game and I were doing the studio, I would have had that. It would have been more protracted and more discussed, and he would have gotten a brighter spotlight shined on him because it warranted that. He was so good in those final 3 minutes. And honestly, if Justin plays like that all the time, and I don't mean he's got to play that way for 40 minutes but if that is the definition of who he is as a player for Indiana going forward, it changes who they are as a team. They're just so much better.
Absolutely. I thought that stretch of basketball might have been the best 4 or 5 minutes of his career. I mean, I thought he was that good.
Yeah, in some way, I remember the Michigan State game last year, and he's making threes and all that, and he was very good at the other end too. But this was a defining thing here.
Yeah.
This wasn't just he got hot and he started dropping shots, and that's nice. And the more of that you can have, the better. But this was a kid who's a very good player, taking over the game in the ways that the best players take over games. And it's not just about making baskets. It's also about making plays. And those final 3 minutes were a masterpiece, and he deserves all the credit for that.
You mentioned off the top Trace Jackson Davis, and I agree with you. I mean, I thought that was the story of the week after really disappearing against Michigan. Giving Indiana a guy to play through consistently for 2 straight games was phenomenal. Is the Big Ten Freshman of the Year race locked up for him, or do you think that there's still some significant challengers out there?
Well, I'm trying to think of who else there would be. That
Coburn, I guess, from Illinois.
Kofi would be the one, and I think he's having a terrific year. I think he's having a very strong year, but I would say that probably you would have to wait till we get closer to the end, given how good Kofi has been. They're both great, and Kofi has changed Illinois' team. He really has. He's turned that team completely 180 degrees from a press and run and try to get you to turn it over team to a team that's elite in half-court defense. And although I'm not sure that we would describe Kofi yet as an elite half-court defender, he is a game changer. He's a rim protector in that way. So I think that they both have really strong cases, and I would be willing to wait to see how these final weeks play out, because you know how this league is, that even after the 2-game winning streak and how well Indiana played in those games, they have to continue to play that well, and they have to continue to take advantage of him to that degree. And if they do that, then he's going to have a tremendous case. But if they start to ignore him again, then Kofi perhaps has a tremendous last couple of weeks, it might change that result.
One topic that a lot of Indiana fans have discussed is the starting lineup, both the beginning of the game and the second half, which has not changed. But certainly, in recent games, Joey Brunk has essentially been starting, playing a couple minutes, coming out, and then you're seeing a lot more Race Thompson, obviously, more Deron Davis. What would you do with the lineup? Would you keep that the same? Would you differentiate between the start of the game and the second half? Because it did feel like in the Penn State game, the way that they came out, they kind of isolated Lamar Stevens on Joey Brunk. It really seemed to hurt Indiana's momentum. Would you make a change there if you were Archie Miller?
I'm a believer when I hear coaches say, and I don't know that Arch has said this, but I've heard a ton, and we all have. When I hear coaches say that it doesn't matter who starts, it's a complete crock. Everybody has now some idea of how things break down with synergy, with in-house analytics. That certain lineups play well together and those sorts of things. But the way I look at, and I've never quite been able to put a handle on why coaches do this, but if a coach in 99.9% of cases, exclusive of perhaps foul trouble or injury, and on the rarest of occasion performance, coaches start the same group in the first half and the second half. They start in the first half, they walk out after halftime, they're on the floor. And that's the way it is in every program in America. And on very rare occasions do you see a shift. And so when I hear a coach say it doesn't matter who starts, you're telling me that basically a quarter of the game, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, because they usually play it together at least 5 minutes roughly for those before somebody gets subbed out. So that's 10 minutes of a 40-minute game, a quarter of the game where you're playing this group together. So you're telling me that doesn't matter? Like how well they play together and how well they fit together, and whether they're your 5 best guys or whether they're their best 5-man unit doesn't matter? Come on, that's nonsense. That's complete garbage. They're the one group that you can almost be certain will play together for a significant period of time, because then fatigue, injury, bad matchup, and guy can't stop the other guy, whatever it might be, guy can't make a shot. And so you say, this just isn't his day. Whatever it might be, you are going to change up a little bit once you start rotating players. But those 5 guys are going to play together for 10 minutes out of 40. So they better fit together. They better be the best for that 40. I don't think you put Joey back out there out of habit just because that's the way you always do it. When the other team's got Lamar Stevens out there just dying to get you switched on ball screens and ready to take you apart. That's not the way it should be done. And that really hurt them. So if you want to start Joey at the beginning of the game because you think it fits the opponent, great. If you want to start him at the beginning of the game because you think that's going to create the best rhythm for you early, great. But if you get into a situation where you see how the other team sets up, and of course, Penn State going in, you knew somebody was going to have to guard Lamar because they play one big, either John Hare at the start or Mike Watkins off the bench, and then they play Lamar with him. And so one of your guys is going to have to be able to guard him. And I don't think that you wanted to put Trace in that matchup because he's a freshman going against the senior, and you'd rather he don't foul. And Joey can't guard him. So I don't know what the expectation would be there. Once you establish that early, that it's not a great matchup for you or in scouting report, you can change. You can say, you know what, for this game, it doesn't work. I mean, I talked to some people at Wisconsin when after they started Micah Potter and Nate Reavers for the first time. And then they were going into another game. I can't remember who it was against. That doesn't play a real power forward. Might have been Rutgers. I'm not sure if it was or not, but there'd be an example. Doesn't play a real power forward. So you don't play Micah Potter and Nate Reavers together. There's nobody for Micah to guard or Nate, whichever one you want to pick. And so you have to play Aleem Ford, and then you fit better. And there's not very many derivations or iterations of college basketball now where being bigger is a huge advantage. The 3-point line has changed that. Ball screens have changed that. Having twin towers, boy, if you do, they better one of them had better have electric quickness and a skill set to play away from the goal. And I don't think that that's the case with Indiana. I think Trace has that, the first quality, but you're not going to guard him at 18 feet because he's not a shooter. So you sag back in the zone or in the lane, and you jam up anything Indiana wants to do, and it becomes problematic. If you are a team that plays a dynamic 3-man hybrid like Lamar or like Ron Harper Jr., or if you are a team that sets up, with 4 guards around 1 or something like that, then you have an advantage over Indiana. Now that's not like that. Joey's been able to start against a lot of teams and not get really and not have real problems because not everybody has a Lamar Stevens or a Ron Harper Jr. But when you do face that team, then you want to make sure that you try to accommodate what's best for you against that team.
Yeah, and I don't think any Indiana fans enjoy this conversation because Joey Brunk has really endeared himself to the fan base. He basically, when this thing was being held together with duct tape in December, he was the duct tape. I mean, he was a really good player there for a while. It's not happening right now, so it'll be interesting.
Hey, let me say, I'm not ruling out the possibility that he gets it going again.
Sure, yeah,
excellent player on offense around the goal, and he can definitely hurt a defense, and he can and he'll battle. He is not a great defender. I don't think I'm breaking any news there, but he will battle. And so I'm not saying write him off. Please don't anybody think that's what I'm saying. I'm just saying that when you get yourself in a matchup like I just described, then you have to watch how you play in that. And I don't know whether Purdue can't say whether that's a threat for them. I'm not sure. I wouldn't necessarily say it's quite the same. It's certainly not the same as having Lamar, one of the best players in the league. But that's, those are the concerns that you have to accommodate as you go through a conference where, one bad possession, 2 bad possessions could cost you a game.
So looking ahead for Indiana, the Hoosiers face Purdue and Illinois this week, both on the road. Those two teams have combined to lose 8 of their last 9 games, although Illinois plays Northwestern and Nebraska before they play Indiana, so they will probably have a little winning streak going. Do you think Indiana gets one of these games? And if so, which one do you think is more likely?
They're tough. They're both tough. And Purdue has been vulnerable finally at home. They had not been beatable at all at Mackey, and finally some teams have started to break through there. But it's up to you to force that on them. They're not going to hand it to you. Sasha Stefanovic had a rough shooting day over the weekend, and I think that came from him being really ardently defended. And so if you just think that's going to happen. I mean, I remember still, we talked about that ball screen, that baseline screen that started the second half around the 17 or 18 minute mark, where he wasn't defended, and how all of a sudden he's a road shooter when he hadn't been all year. So if you dare him to get going again, he will. He has not played his best basketball in the last couple games, but the light flicks when the light comes on for him. It's a glaring spotlight. I mean, so if you let it happen, it'll happen. You have to battle them. You have to battle Travion Williams with everything you have, because he is still going at it, and they have not played really well in a lot of areas recently, as you mentioned. In a lot of leagues, they could probably get away with some of the efforts that they've delivered. They haven't been bad. They just haven't been good. And in this league, if you're not good, you lose. And unless you're playing Nebraska or Northwestern at home, if you're not on top of your game, you lose. It's that simple. There has been basically no exception to that. If you aren't good, at least, your version of good, and since everybody in this league is version of good is pretty good, if you're not that, you're losing. So you have to go into both of those games with a B+ effort at minimum, and it may take more than that. Certainly, the kind of effort that you delivered on the road at Minnesota, especially in the second half, at home against Penn State for all but the first 8 minutes of the second half, that's the kind of performance that's going to win you one of those games, if not both.
So let's look at the conference. We know Maryland is number 1, and then there are 5 teams tied with 6 losses: Michigan State, Penn State, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois. And then you've got Michigan and Ohio State, 2 very hot teams that are high in the predictive rankings that aren't even in there. How are you power ranking the conference right now after Maryland? I assume they're number 1.
Yeah, Maryland would be 1 and Penn State would be 2. I think.
Wait, Penn State would be 2?
They're still on my 4 line.
Oh, okay.
That's surprising to you?
It was to me. That just because they've lost a couple games in a row, but Myron Jones has also been out.
Yeah, they still have played to my 4 line. I don't think that I'm going, when I do this, I'm looking at the full body of work, and I still have them as a 4.
It's also easy to forget all the big road games that they just won too. So
yeah, I would put Iowa next. I still have them as a 4 as well. They have played, they've played better lately. They still have. They're still one of the teams that's more heavily weighted toward home than road, and in this league. And there are a lot of those that have had that issue, but I would put them next. And then I think the team that I would put in the next slot would be Michigan, because if you look at them when they were a whole team, they are now 12-3 when Isaiah Livers finishes the game. I use that as a descriptor because that basically means he didn't get hurt in the middle of it. I mean, you give him another win and another loss if you want to say he played, because he played 3 minutes against Presbyterian and they won. They were going to win if he played 3, 6, 9, or 35. They were going to win that game. And then the other one was the Illinois game that they lost when he got hurt, when it was still competitive. So
yeah,
I look at what they are when he finishes 12-3. That's one of the better records in the country if you project it out. If you project it to you're 24-6, that's flirting with 2-3 seed territory. And they've beaten high quality teams as a whole unit. And honestly, much to the detriment of those they play now, while Isaiah was out, they developed other players to fill his roles. You saw Brandon Johns get a little better. I think he's still got another step or two to become the contributor they'd like him to be this year. You saw Austin Davis become a real asset off the bench. Competes hard, goes at it and he's got really good hands. And he's not the most elite post player, but he finishes when he gets an advantage. And then you've seen Franz Wagner, who had to take a lot of the offensive responsibility that Isaiah was carrying. And he has become a much better player as a freshman. That's another player to look at. I don't know that he'd be a freshman of the year, but another player who's an all freshman caliber player who's made significant improvements in Isaiah's absence. So you have all those improvements they've made. I still think they're one of the most dangerous teams in the league. And I think Joanna's doing a really nice job of dealing with those guys, of having to deal with Isaiah going down so many times. The Rutgers win on the road without him was really impressive. It was one of the better wins in the league this year. So I would say that Michigan would be in that quartet for sure.
One guy that we didn't talk about a ton when we were discussing Indiana is Race Thompson, but he's really a guy who has emerged, has become a really important part of what Indiana's doing. I'd love to get your thoughts on Race, but also just as you look around the conference, who are some other guys like that have kind of emerged that weren't maybe playing much early in the year that now have really assumed a much bigger role? Not superstars, but they've really become a key part of what their teams are doing.
Well, I stole some of my own thunder with Austin Davis, who would certainly fit that description. I think Alahan Demir has become a much better player over the course of the season for Minnesota. Has begun to understand, or has come to understand, I should say, would be better description of what it takes to play in the Big Ten as opposed to playing in the Colonial when he was at Drexel. I think he would certainly fit that. And I think Connor McCaffrey at Iowa has fit that. A guy who a lot of people at one time thought was a non-shooter, just a passer. He's an excellent passer, one of the better passers in the league. But he's also come to be able to make the occasional three-point shot. His percentage isn't super duper. I think it's around 33, 34. But he has a knack for making the shot at the time that Iowa needs it. And so he would be one that I would certainly put in that group as well. And I think, Dante Scott is not necessarily from off the bench, but Dante Scott at Maryland, a guy who started basically because he was the closest thing that they had to a power forward who was ready to play. The Twins weren't ready to play. He got the job. He was not a great player, but now he's making threes. He battles. He's physical. He gives a lot of physical protection to Jalen Smith. That one wondered if there was going to be any protection at all because the guy standing next to him was a freshman. The question doesn't exist now. So I would certainly say that he fits that category. When you getting back to Race, I think that his emergence has been a real asset for the Hoosiers because it allows them to play a lot of different ways. They can play a little smaller than they have for a lot of the year when they put him in. Usually, when they have taken out Joey, they've gone to Duran, and they've fairly rarely gone to a smaller group. And Race is not small, but he's not a center, so it gives them a little bit more defensive flexibility when he plays. A really good finisher. Has done a really nice job. Again, not a guy who's going to disarm you in the post as an offensive player, but who, if he's singled up, can get an advantage and finish the play, and has a lot of different ways to do that. And so I think he's really been an asset and somebody whose emergence has made Indiana significantly better.
I want to ask you about Maryland real quick, because looking at the schedules, they obviously have a 2-game lead, so they're the prohibitive favorite to win the conference. But they've got 2 road games coming up against Minnesota and Rutgers. Both teams are going to be desperate because they really need wins. And then their 2 home games, Michigan State and Michigan, are 2 teams who could beat them at home. I mean, that's a tough way to close out. Do you see them winning enough to maintain their lead in the conference, or do you see them coming back to the pack?
I think they will, because they basically have to just about lose them all to not keep their lead. Because remember, in order for somebody to catch them, somebody else would have to, if they went 2-2, somebody else would have to go 4-0.
Yeah.
And who's doing that? I mean, it's not easy to do in this year's Big Ten. So I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it's, if it's more likely that Maryland will win the conference. But it's interesting. Harold Shelton, our terrific researcher at BTN, noticed that there is a way that in which we actually could have a 7-way tie, and that would entail Maryland.
That would be awesome.
Wouldn't that be something? I still remember when 2011 we were preparing for Big Ten and Beyond. That was one of our first years doing it. I think it was the first year doing it. And so we're preparing for the show. And that was when Michigan, I can't remember who they played, but they played a game in the early afternoon, and then they bussed home or flew home or whatever. And they were at their facility, and then they were watching Michigan State play Ohio State. And if Ohio State won, there would be a 3-way tie. And William Buford hits a wing jumper, a 3-pointer to win the game for Michigan State, assuming win the game for Ohio State. So there's Michigan cheering an Ohio State triumph. All three of them that was the best moment. So I'm picturing, like, I think the last game, I can't remember who, Illinois plays somebody in the last game, and I'm picturing somebody hitting a shot and like 5 different locker rooms going crazy because they're all watching the game together, and they're all set, it's 7-way tie. It would just be incredible.
Illinois, Iowa, I think, is the
Illinois,
last game of the season. Boy, wouldn't that just be a fitting way to end this? What games are you keeping an eye on this week?
Yeah, this week, huge week for the Spartans. Their chance to become the team that people imagine them to be. They have Iowa and at Maryland. It's a real statement week for them, and I still think they're good enough to do that, but they've struggled to find their identity. Honestly, they know that Cassius is great. They know that Xavier Tillman is a warrior, but they haven't been able to come up with the right combination around them. So this is a heck of a week to try. And then Sunday, I believe there's a rivalry between these two schools, Michigan and Ohio State. You've heard that rumor, haven't you?
I think so, yes.
Yes, so that'll be a heck of a game there. That'll be a real blast. And obviously, two of the hottest teams. I shouldn't say that. Forgive me. I hate the word hot. Hot is an excuse to not say they're better. They're hot. No, they're better. They're both better. Now, whether Ohio State can stay better now that Kyle Young is hurt. He's out. I don't know whether he plays Sunday, but he's out with a high ankle sprain. A high ankle sprain is typically a multi-week injury. So I don't know whether he plays on Sunday, and I don't know what that does to them. Certainly they have a very capable young man in E.J. Liddell to take a lot of the minutes, but it definitely changes who they are as a team. And I think they might go to Andre Wesson, but then now they're reshifting multiple positions. And so it really does change who they are as a team. But Michigan's just better. I mean, I don't mean better than they were in November, December. I mean, they're basically that team, only with a season's worth of experience now. And that team was one of the 10, 15 best teams in the country. And I think they are that again.
Last question for you. This is your first year as a published bracketologist, right? Putting brackets out there?
Yeah. I never, in the past, the closest I came was back in the old days before there was real bracketology. I would sit at a McDonald's or a Denny's or something with USA Today with the league standings, and I would check off who I thought was a tournament team. That's about as close as now. However, I am, along with Jerry Palm, a 4-time veteran of the NCAA mock selection process.
Aha, okay.
Come to this with no experience. I went through it 4 times. First year was just the most amazing thing. It was a revelation. I would say it was like seeing the Dead Sea Scrolls or something. You could see behind the door what they actually do. And I mean, I don't know whether everybody else was geeking out like I was, but my jaw was dropped the whole time. So that's how they do it. So I did that, and then I came back several more times for different projects that I was working on. So I know how they do it. They change the rules every now and then, make it tough. to keep up, but I think I've got the rules down now. And so I have a pretty good grip on it. And I've looked at my bracket compared to the two most prominent guys that have done it. And, and honestly, when I see it, I don't see, gee, where am I wrong? When I see a seed that's out of line, I'm like, what are those guys thinking? How could they have that team up there? So I feel pretty confident in my abilities.
Is it the question I had for you about it was, is it changing at all your experience of watching college basketball? Because it seems like when you get into bracketology, it's easy to start seeing teams as resumes instead of teams. Like, do you find yourself doing that at all? Having trouble separating that at all?
When if I'm watching a game, one of my first thoughts, especially for a team that's on the edge, on the bubble, one of my first thoughts is, okay, that's it. You're done or you're out. No, you're out of my bracket. That I do. But when I watch, I still watch as a follower of the game, as an analyst of the game, as a journalist. And, the bracket thing, like I said, in my mind, I still think that way. But sometimes I say that about a team and they end up back in anyway. Like after Cincinnati lost to UCF, I thought there's no way they're in my bracket this week. And then they went and beat Wichita, and some other teams did some not so good stuff. Mississippi State lost to Texas A&M. Okay, you're still in. You're hanging on, but you're still in. So that's the only way that it affects the way I watch a game. A lot of people who get into this business, and I think I fell victim to this in my 20s. But ultimately, if you don't enjoy the games, it's really there's better ways to make a living. I mean, this is the best way to make a living if you enjoy the games, to me. But if not, there's probably more money out there for you. Counting, being an accountant or something. My brother made a lot of money being an accountant.
Yeah.
So but I love the games. I love watching. I love picking it apart. I love talking to players and coaches, and I love interacting with fans. It's still something that I really love. So, like I said, it's the best way to make a living if you're in that headspace, and that has not changed for me for 30 years.
We've gone long, and I don't want to be greedy with your time. Do you have time for one more question? We got a listener
I may
question.
give you a shorter answer, but yes.
Okay. Thank you. This is from Chad. He said, as tournament talk is heating up across the country, we're hearing a lot of people questioning the hype behind the Big Ten. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, that's such nonsense. I mean, if you look at Ken Pom, it's funny how people, like all of us, like 5 years ago, like everybody was into Ken Pom and his ratings. And then all of a sudden you have a year like this and, he can't, those ratings can't be right. Well, except that the net basically says the same thing. And I haven't checked Sagarin, but I bet they say mostly the same thing. I've seen complaints about how the Big Ten seems to have figured out a way to game it. Well, it's impossible to figure out a way to game it when nobody knows what's in it. Nobody knows what the net rankings are. I mean, you have a rough idea of the components. Efficiency is a factor. Performance is a factor. The schedule obviously is a factor. So there's lots in it. But no one knows the formula except the NCAA. So you can't game it if you don't know the number. You can't. So it's silly to say that's what's going on. Look, I'm not saying I am not. And when I've said, and I've said this in print and I've said this on the air multiple times, there has never been a league like this ever in the history of college basketball. And when I say that, people think people scream, like literally like screaming at me on Twitter. 85 Big East, 2011 Big East, 85 Big East got 3 teams to the Final Four. There was the strongest league at the top ever and probably ever will be. You'll probably never see that again. 11 Big East, most teams ever got into the tournament. I don't think the Big Ten is going to get there, although they only have 14 members compared to 16. 91 Big East. 7 out of 9, the highest percentage ever. But the difference between the 91 Big East and this is that 91 Big East was 9 teams. Okay, so they played double round robin. That means each team played 16 league games. Okay, so that meant you had 14, 15 games to play with. you could play as hard or as easy as you wanted. Now, Villanova played a really hard schedule that year, so they got in at 16 and 14. Other people played normal schedules, which meant, I don't know, maybe 3-4 games that are tough and a bunch of bye games or whatever. But there's nowhere to hide in this league. There are 20 league games. If you were lucky, you got 3 against Northwestern and Nebraska. Every other league game was a grind, a nightmare. And that's what's different about this league. 20 league games out of basically the same number. Maybe there's 1 or 2 more you play now than in 91, but basically the same rough number. And you're playing 20 of them in the league, plus most of the teams played an ACC Big Ten game, and a lot of them played a Gavitt games. So those were guaranteed high-quality games as well. So you really got put through the grinder in this league. And so anybody that doesn't want to appreciate that is simply just denying reality. I am not saying that anybody in this league is going to win the championship. Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? Because this is a pretty open deal. But and I'm not saying as well, because I don't know what the seeds are going to be, how it's going to play out. I'm not saying as well that there will be a truckload of teams in the Sweet 16. We don't know. I mean, in 2011, the Big East, I know there was one occasion, there might have been 2, where they eliminated each other. They couldn't get to the Sweet 16 because they had to play each other. And that may happen here. Who knows? But I'm telling you that 12 teams in this league play high-quality basketball. Daniel Oturu would be the best player on 90% of the teams in America. He'd be the best player on 75% of the teams in the Big Ten. And he's on a team that's 500 because the league. And also because, they haven't done some things that they could have done. But mostly it's the league. If they were in the ACC, they're not beating Duke, Florida State. I mean, they might have beat it, but they weren't finishing ahead of Duke, Florida State, or Louisville. But they would be somewhere in competition for a bid, and they would have a really strong record. I watched Stanford play Washington State last night, and I am not an eye test person in terms of going into the tournament, but I'm an eye test person in terms of who can play. And I'm telling you that if Stanford were in this league, Stanford would be finishing behind Purdue and certainly behind Minnesota. They're just not. They just don't have the quality that the teams in this league have.
That was a great answer. I feel like we definitely got our money's worth on that one.
Good.
He joins us every Monday, Mike DeCourcy. We appreciate it. Man, this is going to be a fun final few weeks, and then the blender of a Big Ten tournament. I cannot wait. It's going to be great.
Are we going to have you up here for that?
No, I won't be able to be up there. I'll be watching it from here, but I'm hoping for the first time ever that we can actually do like 3 post-game shows, because usually it's been a very short stay for Indiana.
Gotcha. Well, good luck with that, and I'll talk to you next Monday. And unfortunately, I would love to have bought you a beer or a bacon and eggs or whatever, depending on which end of the day we could have figured out. But
one of these days we're doing that. We will definitely do that one of these days.
Okay. Thanks, Jerod.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. All right. The great Mike DeCourcy. Always appreciate his insight. Good question, Chad. Alan, sorry, I saw that question. Maybe we'll try and ask him that next time. All right. Well, good stuff from Mike. We won't have another show for you, obviously, until Thursday. Should have an episode of Podcast on the Brink between now and then. The guys at Crimson Cast have a new episode out, so you can definitely go listen to that. I'm about halfway through it. Good discussion from those guys, as always. So, yeah, the other thing I'll mention, if you're still listening, make sure if you want to join our community, if you go to assemblycall.com/community, we always have some great conversations in there. And so if you're curious about that, go check it out. It's $3.99 a month, or you can do basically $25 for the full year. I'm really, really excited about the kind of the small but growing group of people that we have in there. Coach does his weekly Coach's Corner videos, basically does a film breakdown of, some important discussion point with the team. So those are in there. So it's a really good community. So go check it out, assemblycall.com/community. If you have any questions about it, just email me, Jerod, Jerod, @assemblycall.com. All right, everybody, I got to go, but we'll talk to you Thursday night. IU Purdue. Hopefully Archie can get that monkey off his back, and Indiana can essentially punch their ticket to the tournament. I think that would all but guarantee it if they can go up there and get a win, because we owe them some payback. They punked us in Bloomington. It's time for us to go up and do the same to them. All right, talk to you Thursday.